I want to talk today about what our partnership with dataJAR has enabled us to do. So I'll just talk a little bit about Trinity College first. So we're Ireland's oldest and highest ranked university. We have a lovely campus that you can see there, and I highly recommend you all come and visit it. I think we're also probably one of Ireland's leading tourist attractions. So if you haven't been, I highly recommend it. So we have over 17,000 students and about 2,500 staff members. So from the presentations I heard earlier today, I feel like maybe we need to get that ratio up a little bit. So we're a university that very much respects tradition, but we do kind of want to look forward into the future and innovate and change, although it's not always the easiest to do when you have such a rich history that a lot of academics like clinging on to. So our Mac setup. We have about 110 Macs currently. Now this is just in our public access computer rooms and lecture theatres. It's actually 9 lecture theatres and 3 computer rooms. So the lecture theatres all have Mac Minis in them, and the computer rooms all have iMacs. But there are also a handful of other rooms under the remit of individual schools and various departments, but we have no control over them. The shadow IT that was kind of mentioned earlier on, that's all over Trinity, and it is very difficult for us to work with. As well as that, we don't actually manage all of the staff machines, and there are quite a few staff who use Macs in Trinity, and it's actually the service desk in IT services that manage them, and I don't know why, but they do. So in terms of our estate, probably we have about 5 times as many PCs, and I have a colleague who's dedicated to just looking after them, and I just look after the Macs. So probably about 3 years ago, we had a staff member, my predecessor, Dave, who he was the only guy that looked after the Macs, and he was very knowledgeable about them, but there was no one else in our team with that knowledge. He was also coming to close to his retirement, and he didn't want to leave us kind of floating adrift. Up until then, we had been using Deploy Studio, and we knew it wasn't going to be feasible going forward into the future. So we knew there needed to be a solution. I should say at this stage, I actually hadn't joined the team yet. I don't think I was even in Trinity at this stage, but he managed to talk to dataJAR through one of our suppliers and got us set up with them. That was done because the role wasn't going to be filled immediately. There was probably going to be, it turned out there was a 9-month gap between him leaving and me getting hired. So my colleague who looks after the PCs doesn't really know anything about Macs, and frankly, he doesn't like Macs. So he's already quite overworked, so he couldn't manage them. So luckily, dataJAR managed to let us bridge the skills gap that was there, and yeah, at the same time, there was also kind of a feeling in our group that the Mac landscape was something that was prone to rapid changes. And if there's one thing Trinity doesn't like, it's rapid changes. So something that dataJAR was very good at helping us to do was say, okay, something's changing, and this is we're going to help you navigate this. So yeah, as I said, they bridged the gap. The system was set up in mid-2016, and from then until about last year, there really was very little input required. I was hired, and I didn't exactly have the same skill set as he did. The role had changed. So prior to me joining, the team, they managed the virtual learning environment, which is a big beast, but they didn't maybe have the exact skills required. So I was brought in more for that, but I also took over the Macs. So I would say, if we hadn't partnered up with dataJAR, it probably would have been necessary for the team to hire someone with a different skill set to me, someone who probably wouldn't have had the same knowledge of virtual learning environments. But because we had the system that dataJAR gave us, we were able to hire me, someone who had relatively little Mac knowledge, and still operate very efficiently. So what has the impact been? So there has been quite a few impacts, but the biggest one, the one I want to talk about the most, is something that everyone wants more of, but you can't really buy, and that is time. So what probably would have taken a third of my predecessor Dave's time probably takes me a tenth or less. I rarely have to worry about the Macs because they kind of just manage themselves. dataJAR help us do that. Entire weeks that would have been taken up in the summer researching what was changing and patching the Macs, doing whatever, now take days. So that's a massive time saving for us. Yeah, it has allowed the job, as I said, to change in order to kind of suit the changing needs of a university. And I'll tell a bit of an anecdote in that just late last year, I actually met two people from another Irish institution who were kind of inquiring about our Mac system and what should they do. So it was a manager and the guy who actually looked after them. And we met and I talked to the system and they were very impressed. But the guy who was actually managing them, not the manager, he was a little bit apprehensive about the whole thing. And I asked him, well, I mean, look, this is great. Like you've heard everything. Why are you so reluctant about this? And it turned out he was actually worried about his job. He said, this is going to make me redundant. Because all his time was just spent managing the Macs. So he was worried. And I said to him, there's no need to, like, okay, I know you're worried. Everyone's worried about their jobs, like AI is taking them and things like that. But what you have to do is understand that job roles change and you have to change with them. I said to him, look, you can spend less time worrying over technical problems and more time actually helping teaching and learning in the university. Because he's well placed to do that, being a Mac expert. So our experience with dataJAR has been very positive. The response times are very good, probably the best of any supplier I've ever dealt with. And a few months after I started, we also decided to get some training off them. And even with a day and a half training, turned me from someone who had very little knowledge about Mac deployment and things like that into someone who is now able to speak at this event today. So that was quite good. And I think maybe this might scare some people, and it might be a bit controversial to say, well, I actually think that this system would allow someone with even less skill than me, I don't have that much, less skill than me to actually look after this. So maybe that's something you might disagree on. So another thing I feel is that it has really allowed us to grow, if we so want to do, to expand our Mac estate without expending a lot of management resources, which is something that everyone wants. We could put 30 new Macs into a room if we wanted, and it would be very little work on my part. It would be more. I would have more work actually putting the Macs physically into the room and setting them up than I would actually getting the software onto them. We would just ask our supplier to put them into DEP, and then we have them set up in dataJAR's MDM, and the software and settings just flow down. And when I compare that to kind of what was done with our PCs last year with Windows 10, my poor colleague, our imaging system couldn't handle it, so we ended up having to go around about 200 PCs with a USB stick, imaging from that. So anything that enables us to avoid doing that kind of thing is good in my book. Something I mentioned earlier is we don't have to really worry about changes in the Mac landscape. And from any Mac event I go to, I can kind of tell that's something that happens a lot. But it's not something I really need to concern myself with. I can just kind of go about my day doing other things, and because dataJAR are going to look after it for me. So security issues, for an example. Last week, I got 2 emails from dataJAR, support emails saying, hi, there was a vulnerability in Firefox. We've patched it. This wasn't something I kind of had to research. I don't need to look at browser vulnerabilities because I know dataJAR are kind of going to do that for me. Because I can just focus on something that's more important to me. Any query I have at all, I can just fire an email off to the guys and they'll get back. And one thing I really do appreciate about them is if I come up with some mad idea, I want to do X, Y, Z, they will say, okay, you could do it like this, you could do it like this. Or if I shouldn't do it, they will be quite happy to say, no, you shouldn't do that, here's why. And I appreciate that. I like suppliers that are honest and like them that want to make you do the best job you can do. So what does the future hold for Macs in Trinity specifically? Well, I personally hope that we can try and bring some of these shadow IT service groups into our remit and get some of the other rooms managed by us. And I also hope that we can get all of the staff devices someday to be managed by dataJAR as well. Because my fear is that with the growing kind of emphasis on data protection and the GDPR and that kind of stuff, is that basically in Trinity, a staff Mac is basically going to be put in the network and then let loose. Like there's no enforcement of policies, there's no necessity to put an encryption or even a password on it, and that's really unacceptable. I mean, it staggers me about how this is going on, but once again, it's in another group and I have no power over it. But I do hope we can convince these people that maybe they need to look at a different solution. And unfortunately, I have to say the same thing for our iOS devices. Currently, not really managed, so once again, not a good thing. But what I'm really excited about is that this kind of system allows me to spend my time with the academics actually doing things that matter, enhancing teaching and learning. Instead of solving a technical problem, I can meet up with a lecturer who might have, I'll give an example, a social policy lecturer who previously just had essays as assessment, but instead she came and said, I want to do a multimedia project for my students, where do I start? And I was able to spend my time helping her. I said, here we've got this brilliant Mac lab full of iMacs. It's iMovie on all of them. Let me do a class showing your students how to use this software, and away they went. That was positively influencing our teaching and learning, and that was the kind of thing that I was enabled to do because I don't have to worry too much about the management of the Macs. So that's all from me. Hopefully it wasn't anything too scary in there. Some more lovely images of Trinity. If anyone would like to talk to me, because I can't hang around for too long today, there's my email address. And I'm going to have to hand over to James now from dataJAR.
You heard Stephen's story there, and what I want to try and get across is nobody's after taking people's jobs. What we're doing here is moving things forward. What we want to achieve is enablement for organisations. So again, we move across into different verticals. So we could be in a bank, as I mentioned earlier. We could be in a design agency. We could be in an education environment. We could be in a primary school. It doesn't matter. But let's not forget why those institutions exist. What are we trying to achieve? And we go back into the whole thing. I think Yanis mentioned earlier about accidental administrators. When I started the company, it came from born out of a desire for change. I worked in enterprise, I've worked in delivering services in education, you name it. But actually, there's a common thing that connects us all, is we all want to use this kit. This kit should be used for teaching and learning in your instances, or it's going to be used for creativity or whatever else in another organisation. But we get distracted, again, trying to look to manage it. So what did we do for Trinity behind the scenes? Well, quite a lot actually, and to be fair, the end result is what Steve's got there, but actually behind the scenes is at least 5 years of hard graft and effort. I mean, a whole Kubernetes environment, a large private cloud, top of the range pure storage, it goes on. But at the heart of our company is skills, and we've hired some of the best people. So when we work with Trinity, we first look, we work all the way back. So actually, at this point, we would happily walk away from any organisation that we haven't had this discussion with. So one of the biggest failed areas of any implementation of Apple hardware is network infrastructure. Did anyone get the survey that went out just before this? Yeah? Okay. So again, I was at another customer the other day. We want you to work with us on 2,500 Mac rollout. We've got 5,000 iPads, blah, blah, blah. Excellent. But we're having bandwidth issues. I went, whoa. Stop right there. You're having bandwidth issues now? Yes. Well, then there isn't a project. Let's deal with those bandwidth issues. Who's your network provider? And so the conversation went. What we don't do is say, here's some licensing, here's a great service, thank you very much, and run out the door. This is very much a customer first scenario. So we sent out this survey, and this question was actually mine. So would you describe your network infrastructure as hostile towards Apple technology? And that is the result on the surveys we've received. 43% can't successfully onboard devices of people, of us in this room at this moment. 43% of you can't successfully onboard an Apple device. Because, as I went to a bank the other day, you can't put that Mac on this network because the Macs can't go on that network. We've got the Windows network, which the Macs can't be part of. At what point did Macs started using a different protocol other than IP to talk to services? Don't know. Apple Talk, yes. Apple Talk over IP, yes, indeed. But this is really interesting, and this is exactly what we see across the board. Nobody's different in this scenario. Whether there's over hostile content filters, is it EduRoam? How are people finding that for onboarding? Rubbish?
It's not the right thing for onboarding. You want a professional network.
Yeah. So we work with one university, and that project's been going on 2 years. Literally been going on 2 years. But we're dragging them kicking and screaming from where they were, which was 1996 with NetWare, through to now where we're saying you can actually push this stuff out. And they've got teams and teams and teams and teams of people all across the board, all looking after their own little silos. What we do is look at the whole lot and go, right, the question you're asking there was actually answered over there, and so on and so forth, and we bring the whole piece together. So this is a common one. So this is always the first point. Who's using caching servers and other services like that on the network? Content caching? No? Okay. Content caching is vital for any large deployment of Apple hardware. Your network infrastructure, the first thing, get all these things in place, and then everything else will actually follow. And ultimately, we've talked a lot today about user experience. A really bad user experience is having a VPP download that just stops. What does that generate? A help desk call. But if we go back right to the beginning, get this right, everything else will fall into place. You can't build a house on matchsticks. And that's exactly what most people, 43% in fact, are trying to do. So the next thing, as part of what we do and what we help with Trinity was, are you using Apple deployment programs? So we have been pushing customers to Apple deployment programs since 2014. The day it was released, we were straight on it saying, you need to be using this technology. This is where it's going. No stop imaging. You can see a mile away where things are going, even back in 2014. Distribution of applications from the App Store, device enrollment program, you can see how easy this stuff was. We didn't have any visibility at that point of the T-series architecture, which obviously is now commonplace. But quite rightly so, for Apple's own reasons and for mainly our protection, our own interest, Apple is implementing this amazing technology to protect us all. So we can go back to those InfoSec teams and say, we need these things. I mean, the conversations I have had with some quite large banks, and again, I was chatting with Matt earlier about some of these, we're not going to allow things like APNS through our network because we can't see inside the traffic. Well, what kind of argument actually is that in the scenario? They don't actually understand the technology. So there's a lot of what we like to call assumed knowledge as well. I mean, hands up here, who actually knows how APNS works? Yeah, one. And where are you from? Yeah. The thing is here, there's a lot of assumed knowledge. So we're all being asked to support this technology, but actually, sometimes what needs to happen is a specialist needs to be brought to the table to actually take on these conversations and say, right, this is exactly what you need from an network layer. This is what you need from an InfoSec position, and connect all these dots together. So again, the survey that went out, do you use DEP or Apple School Manager to provision your devices? 45% of you are still trying to image computers. That's gone. That was gone in 2014, so why are we still trying to do it now in 2019? Granted, we can't all be on the bleeding edge of these things, but still, I'm not shocked by this because I see this day in, day out. And what we're trying to do is to highlight old practices need to die. They need to move forward with the technology. So I hate to say this, but Apple actually know best in this instance. Anyone who's still trying to do old workflows is like a salmon swimming upstream. It's going to hurt you really bad. Then we look at the device management piece. So what is device management? So we've talked a lot about this. I actually would probably look, device enablement is probably what I tend to try and use here, because what are we doing with that person using that device? We've talked a lot about user experience. No, we don't want to lock these things down. This can also be misused, and we see that a lot. I was telling someone a story earlier of one education customer I worked at. This was the attitude, and it went along the lines of, I said to him, why do you want to lock out keyboard and mouse settings? And he said, I don't want the students playing around with those settings. And I said, what happens if you have a left-handed student? And his reaction was, we don't have any of those. God's honest truth, that's what he looked at me in the eye and told me. And I said, right, okay. So anyway, we go from that direction to this. And again, we put a survey out there. Again, we were looking at Trinity, what they were doing in their situation. And typically, this is what we've got. Do you manage Apple devices owned by your organization? 20% of people are burying their head in the sand. Now, what I've heard today is a lot of academics and other things. Now, what is it we're dealing with academics in this situation? Is it not, it's understanding how the academic or why the academic and their teams feel threatened perhaps about you having control of their devices. So why don't you give control of those devices to the academic, and you give them a way to control their own systems, still under the guise of IT, but they don't see the IT part. What IT get is a compliance tick, and they say that's sorted to stop any breaches and other bits and pieces. But by not managing devices, you're going to, I think there was one university we went to recently, we've got 400 machines managed in Jamf. What is your entire estate? I think it's about 16 to 1700 maximum. What do you mean you think you've got that amount? It's unknown. It's out there in the wild. There is no reachability to those devices to control them. So again, this is another huge concern. So this is when we brought in this service. And again, this has been built right from the ground up. And this is what Trinity are on. This is how we've enabled them to focus and enabled them to concentrate on delivery of services. So from the top level down, every single device that is on that network, that leaves that network, that is portable, must be encrypted. This is what you can put into a high-level design document. This is what this service delivers, point by point. Every single device that is enrolled into this service will have the latest version of software that is required on that device and is supported on that device based on a central specification. We don't need to worry about the other bits and pieces about what operating system versions, blah, blah, blah. It does all that detection, but this is the logic we have to put into this. Yes, we can do MDM. That's very much a commonplace thing. If people don't have MDM and you have a large estate of Apple devices, you're being a salmon again. You need some nice zero-touch workflows. There's a lot about this. Zero-touch, I do often laugh when people talk about zero-touch. You usually get a few smirks in the room because it's very much an industry saying, but is it really zero-touch? Someone's got to touch the device. It's not going to unbox itself. So there is a process there. But again, macOS Catalina's coming out. If you're using Jamf, you're using things like Dep Notify, Splash Buddy. They don't work in Catalina yet. So who's going to put the dev time in now to fix that? That's the thing. Does your internal team do that? Or are you going to be focusing on making this thing work instead of supporting this thing? Self-service and other tools, again, this is all part of the process. But this is where we start to get slightly different. Again, if you wanted to make those academics have control of their own devices while still under the guise and under the general guidance of IT, you can give them control. If you gave someone access to Jamf Pro, an IT professional, they wouldn't look twice. If you gave Jamf Pro to an academic, they'd go, what is this nonsense? Why do I need to know this? I haven't got the time for this. So we give them a window in to do this. The best technology in the world is useless without the people to support it. There's a lot of amazing technology out there at the moment in the Apple space, technology like Workspace ONE and things like that. The problem is, if the support is not there for your organization and the knowledge, and again, same as what we did with Trinity, it's not just a, this is broken, can you fix it? It's, we're thinking about doing this. Right, well, let's take a look back actually, a bit more of your strategy. What are you trying to achieve as an organisation? What can we help you do? So what we do, and the same with Trinity, yes, here's Jamf. Jamf is a fantastic, if not the best, Mac management product on the marketplace. Does it do everything you need it to do today? No. What you need is a load of devs and some time. And that's exactly what we bring to the table. So there is a whole patch framework, like what Ben showed you with Oxford. That's delivered as part of the service. DEM. We can discover, enroll, and manage devices. We've got a mechanism, so you can put an app on an iOS device, and you can work out straight away how hostile your network is. And it will give you nice green lights saying, on this network, you can enroll a Mac. On this network, you can't. Instant feedback. Instead of trying to go back to your network team, have we got the right rules here? Are there any port ACLs on this? I don't know, I can't get to this service. We can do all those checks straight away. Management for your end users as well. So that can be done literally via an app. If anyone needs to see that, by the way, we've got some demos and some devices. You need to deliver your software, so we need to remove that network barrier. So you're all in charge of very large environments. That environment doesn't stop at your firewall. There isn't a network boundary anymore. Things like Warden. If you do have a stuck VPP install, we've written software that deals with some of the inadequacies of macOS. So if a VPP install gets stuck, Warden comes in and says, hang on a minute, that's been sitting there too long. Xcode may start downloading, get stuck for whatever reason, deletes it, starts it again. Just eases that workflow. If you're deploying Logic or GarageBand to all your machines, Warden will go, hang on a minute, that's an application that needs additional content. I'm now going to go off and grab all of those additional loops, all 102 gig, I think, for Logic. Thanks for that. About that, 30 odd gig for GarageBand. But what you have is labs and labs and labs and labs and labs and machines that just work, because that is what the user experience is about. What are we trying to do? Are you in a place to deliver services for the university, or to start developing new software? So I'll give you an example of what Trinity have, part of their zero touch. So this typically could be a staff one-to-one device being onboarded off network. Okay, so they go through, we'd have probably seen this a million times. They authenticate to the directory. Again, you could be using other services, you could be using Jamf Connect, whatever. A local account's created. And the user can go through and select any options that IT have enabled them to do. And this is where it gets slightly more interesting, because it's about making this process nice and simple. And we talk about zero touch, but really people that are not deploying self-service and expecting all the software to come down in one hit. I mean, our expertise on this would say that a Mac coming into a system that is a staff device will have a minimal piece of software in it. It's our job to get that device in and enrolled and ready to use as quickly as possible. Not sitting there for 5 hours installing every single application from Creative Cloud. So get it onboarded, get it done. They're self-service, go and grab Office 365. Once that's installed, everything else is configured for it, blah, 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 we go on. But they're ready to start using that device. So this grabs all the software, device restarts. Obviously any policies apply, whatever your login window method will be, Jamf Connect, Okta, Azure, doesn't matter. They can go and grab any software they need to do their job. When they request software, this will be always the latest and newest piece of software of that particular product. So if it's Google Chrome, it's the same version that's deployed in the rest of the machines, which is updated weekly. And I think we do about 400 titles on our package runs a week. User logs out, and again, back to keep that info set requirement, device is encrypted, firewall keys are escrowed, that's it. You've onboarded someone in a matter of minutes. Doesn't need to get any more complicated than that. That's similar kind of process to what you've got there, Stephen Labs, yeah. So yeah, auto update, again, we open sourced a project, I don't know if any of you are using it, called Jamjar. We've actually got a version of that internally, which obviously isn't open sourced. There's a whole load of logic around that. The guy who wrote that product is actually sitting in the other room at the moment on a phone to a customer, but he's around if you want to chat to him about it, about even implementing Jamjar. But what is it? We have all of the software. And Trinity had some really special software. And other universities have got some really special software. We've got this version of Java that needs to be done with this. And yeah, all the hinky software. But our idea is here to automate all of this stuff as quickly as possible and make sure the delivery of that software is done. So we've got a cloud-based application, again, completely outside of Jamf. There's none of this is Jamf at this point, which will work out where a device geographically is. And it will transact and repoint it to its nearest distribution appliance, whether that's on-prem or whether it's in the cloud. So it doesn't matter whether the device is there or not, it will get its software. So this brings this question. Do you deploy Mac App Store applications to your managed macOS devices? 67% of you said no. So my question here was, if you're not using VPP, that means those applications are outside of the App Store. So we go to the usual suspects, Creative Cloud, Google Chrome, blah, 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 blah. So do you have teams of people packaging this software on site? Anyone? You got any packaging specialists on site? Just one? No? Yeah? How much of your job is this taking up to package software? And how up to date is that? So do you literally sit there watching, waiting for a product to update, or is this kind of is there a workflow you have every week? Because we've got racks and racks of machines in a data center just doing this. Better still, your time is then spent delivering other bits and pieces. So this did stick out to me quite a lot because, you know, why are we're all packaging software, right? So one university needs Office, another university needs Office. So what we do is we connect the two. We say, well, we've done that for you, so there's Office, or there's Creative Cloud. We've talked about who is using Jamf here at the moment? Show of hands. Most? Firewave? Anyone? No? What's that, sorry?
We're a big uni, so yeah, there is a good reason.
Fine. So what we look at actually is the edge cases. So we mentioned there about training passes and everything else. What we're trying to do is to say there can be a central platform, there can be a central service, much like Trinity. But do they need full control to do bits and pieces and do their job? Well, the answer is no. So what we did was basically wrote our own front end, an application, which can be done and used anywhere where you are, basically. You can change configurations on the device, you can do a lot of the functions, but without the overhead and without having to worry about how to use some of these complex management products, because they can be. And that's why there are skilled people using those products. But if you can give an academic a really 3-step or a couple of buttons to change a load of things, then why not? So in this scenario, we could have a group of machines that are set for design or one particular lab configuration. You can do a bulk highlight and then say, right, these are now for media. And like that, immediately they all change and the whole persona and load set of that software changes and software gets pulled off and new stuff gets put down. That's it. Doesn't need to get any more complex. And I mentioned there about the support. So just trying to get a gauge here. A show of hands who have got 2 Jamf admins looking after their estate at the moment. How many people have got 1 Jamf admin looking after their entire estate at the moment? Okay. I'm not one to tell things, well, to point out the obvious about single points of failure and those nice disaster recovery manuals, but my old IT director used to say to me, can you write all this down, Jim? Because just in case you get hit by a bus, if you have got a service like this and it is at a large scale like this, why is there only one person looking after it? So where we come in is to say, well, actually, it's a platform, it's a service. So someone mentioned their device management as a service. That's exactly it. So 10 years ago, we all thought it completely acceptable to have a Microsoft Exchange team. Now, it's merely the question of Who do I need to put my email in? Is it Google or Microsoft? We don't think twice about shifting all this to make it someone else's responsibility. Because our job is better. I mean, who's run an email server? A big one. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So it's about this continuation of service. If people need to move on to do different jobs, there should be no effect on that device or that service or any degradation at all. It will just continue, much like the very brick and the building and the bricks and mortar that building stands on. It will continue. We don't make our own electricity. It's given to us. That's all I've got, but again, I'd like to open the floor to any questions for Steve and I.